more human than I am alone.
All right, horror fans, strap in. Today we're peeling back the sticky, slimy, and downright bizarre layers of David Cronenberg's The Fly from 1986. This isn't just your typical monster flick. It's a tragic love story wrapped in grotesque body horror filled with behind-the-scenes secrets that are almost as disturbing as the film itself. So let's dive into 20 weird and crazy facts about The Fly, a film that made audiences squirm, scream, and maybe even gag just a little.
Got into the transmitter pod with me that first time when I was alone.
Fact 1. The movie was almost directed by someone else. Believe it or not, The Fly might have looked completely different. Originally, the film wasn't even in David Cronenberg's hands. It was attached to a British director named Robert Bierman. Bierman had already begun early prep work, but then tragedy struck when his daughter died in an accident. Devastated, he stepped away from the project entirely. That left the producers scrambling, unsure who could take on such a bizarre horror remake. And here's where fate stepped in. Cronenberg, who had just finished Scanners and Videodrome, was suddenly available after his deal to direct Total Recall collapsed. Enter Mel Brooks. Yes, that Mel Brooks, who recommended Cronenberg as the perfect replacement. Without that twist of fate, the movie we know today might have never existed. Fact 2. Mel Brooks secretly produced it. Speaking of Mel Brooks, this is one of those facts that still blows people's minds. The comedy legend who gave us Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, and Spaceballs secretly helped bring one of the goriest horror films of the decade to life. Brooks was instrumental in securing funding, convincing executives the remake was worth making, and even giving Cronenberg freedom to take the film in bold, grotesque directions. But Brooks also knew his name could overshadow the movie. Imagine audiences seeing a Mel Brooks film before a scene of Jeff Goldblum vomiting acid onto someone's hand. That branding mismatch could have killed the film's chances, so he chose to stay in the shadows. Only later did people discover that the mastermind of parody was quietly behind one of the most shocking horror tragedies of the 80s.
Remember that? An inch away from the Nobel Prize for Physics?
Fact 3. Jeff Goldblum wasn't the studio's first choice. Jeff Goldblum feels inseparable from The Fly, but he almost didn't get the role. The studio was nervous about his quirky, eccentric energy and wanted someone more conventionally bankable. They tossed around names like Richard Dreyfuss, Willem Dafoe, and even Michael Keaton. But Cronenberg wasn't interested. He saw in Goldblum a perfect balance of brilliance and awkwardness, the kind of guy who could believably invent teleportation pods while also looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Goldblum's ability to swing between charming vulnerability and unsettling mania was essential. Cronenberg fought for him, and it paid off. Goldblum's performance not only defined the film, but also set a new standard for horror acting, equal parts heartbreaking and terrifying.
Drink deep, or taste not the plasma spring.
Fact 4. Geena Davis almost didn't get the role. Here's another casting twist. Geena Davis, who played Veronica, was actually dating Goldblum at the time. You'd think that would have made her the obvious choice. Instant chemistry, right? Wrong. Studio executives thought it was a terrible idea. They feared a real-life romance would implode during production and create chaos on set. Cronenberg, however, insisted on letting Davis audition. Once she did, the producers changed their tune. She had the intelligence, strength, and vulnerability needed to keep the movie from being just a gore fest. And thanks to her connection with Goldblum, the relationship on screen felt achingly real. Without Davis grounding the story, The Fly would have been gross, sure, but it wouldn't have been nearly as tragic. Fact 5. The makeup took up to 5 hours a day. Seth Brundle's transformation into Brundlefly is the film's unforgettable centerpiece, and it didn't come easy. Every morning, Jeff Goldblum sat through 4 to 5 hours of makeup and prosthetics designed by Chris Wallace and Stefan Dupuis. In the early stages, it was subtle, blemishes, rashes, weird hairs, but by the final stages, Goldblum was buried under pounds of latex, fake fluids, and slime. He could barely move, barely see, and yet he still delivered one of the most emotional performances of his career. Wallace's work was so groundbreaking, it won the Academy Award for Best Makeup in 1987. It's rare for horror films to win Oscars, but this one was undeniable. Goldblum's gradual, horrifying decay remains one of the most convincing body horror effects ever put on screen. Fact 6. Cronenberg cut the grossest scene of all. And that's saying something, because The Fly is already disgusting. But believe it or not, Cronenberg filmed a scene so revolting, even he thought it went too far. Known as the monkey cat sequence, it involved Brundle experimenting with teleportation and fusing a baboon with a house cat. The result was a shrieking, deformed monstrosity that Brundle later beat to death with a pipe. When test audiences saw it, they didn't feel horror. They felt anger. Suddenly, Brundle wasn't a tragic figure anymore, just a cruel monster. Cronenberg realized the scene broke audience sympathy, so he cut it. That deleted footage has since become infamous, living on only in horror legend and grainy VHS outtakes. Fact 7. Jeff Goldblum's voice became part of The Fly. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was vocal. As Brundle's DNA mixed with the Fly's, his voice began to change. Instead of relying solely on digital manipulation, Goldblum actually recorded multiple versions of his lines at different pitches and intensities. Sound designers then layered in buzzing, distorted effects on top. The result? A gradual vocal breakdown that matched his physical decline. By the end, Brundle doesn't just look like a monster, he sounds like one too. It's one of those subtle details that sells the horror on a subconscious level. You don't even realize it's happening until suddenly, he doesn't sound human anymore. Fact 8. The maggot dream was real. Remember that nightmare scene where Veronica dreams of giving birth to a giant maggot? Yeah, that wasn't CGI. That writhing larva was an animatronic puppet built specifically to look slimy, fleshy, and disturbingly alive. Cronenberg himself even appears in the scene as the gynecologist delivering it, adding an extra layer of surrealism. The dream was so shocking that audiences weren't sure if it was just a nightmare or a glimpse of future horror. Geena Davis admitted filming the scene was unnerving, and test audiences reportedly squirmed in their seats. The maggot baby became one of the most infamous pregnancy horror moments ever put on film, and decades later, people are still haunted by it. Fact 9. Goldblum's teeth almost betrayed him. Here's a detail you probably missed. At the time of filming, Jeff Goldblum actually wore dental caps. The makeup team realized Brundle's teeth needed to look like they were decaying along with the rest of his body. To solve it, they created rotting, brown-stained false teeth for Goldblum to swap in. They looked so convincing that fans assumed his real teeth were being destroyed by the mutation. Goldblum later joked it was one of the few times in Hollywood when having bad teeth was considered an asset. Even in close-ups, the illusion worked perfectly, making his physical breakdown all the more believable. Fact 10. The arm wrestling scene shocked audiences. One of the film's most iconic moments is the arm wrestling match where Brundle, now super strong, casually snaps a man's arm in half. The prosthetic was filled with meat, tendons, and bones to create a disturbingly authentic fracture. The sound effect? Simple, just celery and carrots breaking. Audiences weren't prepared. In theaters, people gasped, screamed, and even walked out. Cronenberg knew it was a turning point. Brundle wasn't just deteriorating, he was dangerous. It's a quick moment, but it perfectly illustrates how his gift of strength was really just the Fly taking over, stripping away his humanity, one horrifying step at a time. Fact 11. Cronenberg made it a love story first. David Cronenberg has always insisted that The Fly isn't just a horror film, it's a romance. From the very beginning, he structured the story as a tragic love affair that happens to unravel through body horror. Seth and Veronica's relationship isn't just background filler, it's the emotional core. Without it, Brundle would just be another mad scientist. Instead, he's a man driven by obsession and slowly losing the person he loves most. Cronenberg even said the movie is a relationship film that just happens to be a horror story. That's why audiences didn't just recoil at the gore, they cried. The finale, when Veronica is forced to kill Brundlefly, is devastating. It's Romeo and Juliet by way of disintegrating fingernails and acid vomit. And that balance between love and horror is what elevates The Fly above countless other monster movies of its era. Fact 12. AIDS shaped the film's meaning. When The Fly came out in 1986, audiences couldn't ignore the parallels to the AIDS epidemic. Seth's slow, wasting transformation, the sores, the weight loss, the way his body betrayed him, looked eerily similar to what the world was witnessing with HIV/AIDS. Cronenberg didn't write it as an AIDS allegory, but he acknowledged later that audiences projected those fears onto the film. He actually intended it more broadly as a metaphor for aging, disease, and mortality. Watching someone you love fall apart physically while you can't stop it, that was the horror he wanted to capture. But the timing gave it a darker resonance. For many, The Fly wasn't just science fiction. It was a mirror of the very real nightmare unfolding in the 1980s. Fact 13. The baboons were real and unpredictable. You know those teleportation pod experiments with baboons? Yeah, those weren't puppets. They were very real, very strong, and very unpredictable animals. The handlers warned Cronenberg that if the baboons got agitated, they could attack and seriously injure people. Strangely enough, Jeff Goldblum was the only cast member they seemed comfortable around. His tall, lanky frame made the baboons treat him as dominant, almost like their alpha. Cronenberg later admitted working with them was one of the most stressful experiences of the shoot. Any wrong move could have ended in chaos. And remember, this was the 80s, when animal safety on sets wasn't nearly as strict as today. Watching those scenes now, you realize just how dangerous they actually were. The horror wasn't always fake. Fact 14, Geena Davis almost vomited on set. By the end of the film, Seth Brundle's transformation is so extreme that even Geena Davis had trouble keeping it together. She later admitted that during the final stages of makeup, when Goldblum was buried under slime, pus, and peeling prosthetics, the smell was overwhelming. Add in the buckets of goo, fake fluids, and the heat from the lights, and it became unbearable. Davis gagged between takes, and at one point she nearly vomited on set. Her visible disgust in those emotional scenes wasn't acting, it was genuine. That authenticity worked in Cronenberg's favor, though. Veronica's horror felt real because it was real. Davis wasn't just watching a co-star under latex, she was reacting to a grotesque spectacle that could make anyone sick. Fact 15. It won an Academy Award for makeup. It's rare for horror films to win Oscars, but The Fly pulled it off. In 1987, Chris Wallace and Stéphane Dupuis won the Academy Award for Best Makeup. The Academy doesn't usually reward gore, but the work here wasn't just disgusting, it was groundbreaking. The gradual stage-by-stage decay of Seth Brundle was revolutionary in its detail. Instead of one big monster reveal, we got a slow, horrifying metamorphosis. Every rash, every hair, every falling nail felt believable. By the time Brundle emerged as the fully realized Brundlefly, audiences forgot they were watching latex and animatronics. They believed it. That Oscar win cemented The Fly as more than just a horror flick. It became a landmark in practical effects history. Fact 16. The original ending was different. The ending of The Fly is iconic. Veronica, sobbing, puts Brundlefly out of his misery with a shotgun blast. But that wasn't always the plan. One alternate ending had Veronica dreaming of giving birth to a perfectly normal baby with butterfly wings. It was supposed to symbolize rebirth and transformation. Test audiences didn't take it that way. They laughed. Cronenberg realized that instead of tragic, it played as silly. Another cut showed Veronica pregnant with Brundle's child, but choosing to keep it, which felt too ambiguous. In the end, Cronenberg went with heartbreak, and it was the right choice. The movie closes on a devastating note that still leaves audiences shaken instead of walking out amused. Fact 17. Jeff Goldblum kept souvenirs. When the film wrapped, Jeff Goldblum didn't want to leave the horror behind. He was so fascinated by the prosthetics and fake body parts used for Brundle's transformation that he asked to keep some. For years, he reportedly held onto jars of Brundle goo and even some fake ears. It sounds like a morbid collector's dream, but for Goldblum, it was just part of the ride. He often joked about how weird it was to invite someone over and casually show them a fake fly appendage sitting on his shelf. Considering how iconic the makeup was, it's no surprise he wanted a piece of cinematic history to take home, even if it was sticky and grotesque. Fact 18. A sequel was made, but without Cronenberg. In 1989, Hollywood tried to strike gold again with The Fly 2. This time, it was directed by Chris Wallace, the same genius behind the original's makeup effects. The sequel followed Martin, the son of Seth and Veronica, who inherits his father's mutation. While it featured some creative and gory effects, it lacked the emotional core that made the first film so unforgettable. Critics panned it as shallow, and audiences mostly forgot it. Wallace himself admitted later that while he was proud of the effects, he wasn't able to capture Cronenberg's tragic love story. Today, The Fly 2 is remembered mainly by hardcore fans, a footnote to a classic rather than a worthy continuation. Fact 19. Cronenberg considered a remake of his own remake. Years later, Cronenberg flirted with the idea of remaking The Fly again. But this time, he didn't want to just retread the same ground. Instead, he envisioned a reimagining that would explore new scientific angles about genetics and obsession. He even wrote a script in the 2000s and pitched it to Fox. Unfortunately, the studio passed, worried audiences wouldn't respond to another Fly movie. Cronenberg shrugged it off, but fans have always wondered what his updated take would have looked like. Considering how much science has advanced since the 80s, his version could have been even more terrifying. Less about teleportation pods, more about DNA and biotechnology.
What happened?
Oh, I think it's showing itself as...
Fact 20, it was nearly X-rated. And finally, here's a fact that shows just how far The Fly pushed the limits. When Cronenberg submitted the film to the MPAA, they were horrified by the gore. They threatened it with an X rating, the kiss of death for any mainstream release. Cronenberg fought back, trimming just a few seconds of footage. Extended shots of fingernails popping off, extra gore from the arm wrestling scene, and lingering shots of Brundle's final transformation were all shortened. With those edits, the film squeaked by with an R rating. Even then, audiences were stunned at how much it showed. In the mid-'80s, this was extreme. The Fly became proof that horror could still shock, disgust, and disturb, and yet still earn mainstream recognition.
Help me.
And there you have it, 20 weird, wild, and downright stomach-churning facts about The Fly. From Mel Brooks' secret role as producer to the deleted monkey cat scene, this film remains one of the most unforgettable horror tragedies ever made. It's not just about goo and gore, it's about love, obsession, and the terrifying fragility of the human body. So, horror fans, would you survive a teleportation pod experiment gone wrong, or would you crumble into Brundlefly like the rest of us? Smash that like button, subscribe for more creepy deep dives, and let us know your favorite gross out moment from The Fly in the comments below.